everybody. It's good to see you again tonight for night 5 of the Orphan's Tales live reading series. Once again, the music that you can hear behind me is by S.J. Tucker. This is called Sorrow's Song. It's from the second album, Hi Laurie, based on the sequel, In the Cities of Coin and Spice. These are sort of EP albums, so it's kind of difficult to play songs that don't have spoilers in them, but I'm doing my very best to make sure that none of you are spoiled by the lyrics to SJ's great songs. You can find her at sjtucker.com and on Bandcamp under the same name. She's done 4 albums based on my books, on Fairyland, Palimpsest, and the 2 Orphan's Tales novels. We'll be reading from In the Night Garden tonight, which is the first Orphan's Tales book, and as I've said before, I deeply hope we don't make it to the second one. I'll be doing this every night for free until the lockdown ends, which I don't know when that will be, but I certainly hope it's soon. You may or may not be able to see the living shadow that is my very black cat, Lord Byron, moving around behind me. He needs to be a part of this, as he assures me. So let's get the legalities out of the way for all purposes of lawyers and litigation. If anyone from Random House asks you, you did not listen to an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales, this is a play. I do not have the audiobook rights to The Orphan's Tales, so you can't possibly have listened to an audiobook. This is a one-woman show. You can find me at Patreon, at Cat Valenti, on Twitter at Cat Valenti. There is a tip jar on my Instagram profile and on my website. If you feel like throwing a coin in the hat, we would be terribly grateful. Things are really tight for us this month particularly. Thank you so much to Becca and Michaela for tipping me last night. You are genuinely my heroes. It means the world to our little household that is struggling to deal with 2 freelancers during this whole situation. So thank you so much. Anybody who drops a couple of coins in, I will thank you personally on the next stream. Going on to the next part of the Orphan's Tales. I was working today on the novel that I'm writing right now and just thinking of what a strange accordioning of time writing a book is, that all of these strange moments of spending all day trying to come up with the perfect name for something, or just hours imagining the way a village is arranged, or all of the daily choices that go into writing a novel get all crunched up and squished together and put in between 2 covers, and then you kind of forget how much time you spent trying to come up with those very specific things, how much blood, sweat, and tears you poured into it, and it all gets crunched up in your memory too, so that the days where you only wrote a few hundred words because everything was just too hard go away. And today was a day where I spent half the day trying to come up with 2 single names, and I won't remember today either when this book comes out, probably. So it's a very strange little time travel experiment writing a novel, and this I wrote some 18 years ago, so boy do I not remember the individual days of making these choices, and some of them, like there's a name in the tale I'm going to read tonight, in the Wolf's Tale, and I am positive it means something deeply meaningful, and I spent hours coming up with it, and I don't remember that at all, and that's just kind of the writer's life, particularly if you're doing these kinds of complex fantasy novels. So this is kind of an unaccordioning of memory for me. So let's get started. We were just about to begin the Wolf's Tale with the golden wolf that our recently enwolfened narrator, Grandmother Bentbow, had turned into. All right. The Wolf's Tale. In the first days, when we came walking over the first grass, we burned it, no matter how lightly we tried to step. It went up in long white rows of flame, and even we were afraid of it, afraid of what we could do in this place. We tried to walk on stone only, mute dead stone, you understand, and mute dead grass, not the living blade and rock that, doesn't matter. Our feet killed it, whatever we touched, and we huddled in fear of the fires that we couldn't stop. But whether the grass got stronger or we got weaker, it was not long before we just left scorch marks. Black and ugly, yes, but there were no more holocausts in our tracks, and we began to explore the world that the mare had left for us when she left the sky. I was young, as we all were. We named everything, we named ourselves. The bee star, which was so bright and small and happier than any of us. That little sun yellow speck who never had to kill grass or stone just to walk from one place to the other, called me Leolfer. And whenever he buzzed about my ears, I heard the whir of my name in his wings. It was more confused than you might think. There were so many of us, but so many more of them. The mare's real children were so much wilder and more numerous than we were. The ones that came flying out of her body still clung with moon grease and sky spittle. We were just holes, after all, holes filled up with light. And deep in our secret hearts we worried that we were an accident, nothing more than puddles who stood up and gave each other names, and lightless creatures who could walk so easily, were the only things that were meant to be born. So we watched them, we followed them and tried to imitate them. Some of them looked like us. Holes in the shapes of men, and holes in the shapes of animals, and holes in the shapes of plants and tools and stones. And naturally we clung to those that seemed most like us. But above all things we tried to imitate men and women, who seemed the most intended of all the things that came out of the mare, who came out speaking and naming and plowing and stomping just as we had. But they were afraid of us, of how we burned and how we set to flame what they thought was good and beautiful. They called us ghosts and worse, but we couldn't leave them. They had been inside the mare, after all, and we had never known that, never known what she looked like from under rib and heart. We wanted to know. We wanted in her absence to love what had been part of her. And yes, we saw our light passing into them, into the men and the plants and the tools and the stones, and many of us left then, went into conclaves of like with like, rose stars with bee stars, and worm stars with snail stars, determined to keep safe and whole. But some of us, like whipped dogs following behind a cruel master, kept near people and tried to look like them, for we had discovered, just as they discovered how to seed a field and leave one part fallow, that just because we had been chewed into a certain shape did not mean we had to keep it. It always hurt the first time to shiver off the shape our mother gave us, but it got easier. It was the biggest thing we knew how to do, but we were learning. We were just children, and we played with the world like blocks and dolls, but our siblings did not want to play with us. And so it was that the Manikarnika met their fate, and we learned a thing that we could do that was much bigger and more terrible than changing our skin. I would like to say that I knew them, and I did, in the sense that second cousins in a large family know each other, which is to say hardly at all. They were not like me. They were stone stars, while I was a wolf star, and they changed to women, while after a few experiments I stubbornly kept the paws and the tail that my mother gave me. But there is not one among us who does not know this story. The Manikarnika were 7 sisters, and when they were gnawed from the flesh of the mare, they were stones, jade and granite and opal, garnet and shale and iron ore and little diamond, pale as a milk-soaked paw. They were horrified when they tried to roll and clatter on the dead stone and burned it, melted it, fused it together into glittering molten rivers. When they learned to walk on 2 legs, they avoided the mountains like sickness, refusing to harm anything that was so like their first bodies. I tell you this so that you will know they were gentle, that the burning was not what any of us meant, but accidents will breed accidents, you know. We couldn't help it. They couldn't help it. After the first of us started to dim and the first of us went into exile beyond swamps and hills, the Manikarnika stayed. They were not jealous of their light and were determined to show us that we could live in the world the mare had made, that it was meant for us as well as for her true children. To show us this, they went to the villages of men and asked to be taken in like beggar women, dressed in rags and poor as empty plates. They were sure they would be welcomed, and we would see that the second litter of the mare would call us sisters and brothers and even wives, and there would be family between first and last. Of course their light still spangled all around them, but who would refuse a beautiful girl who barely owned her own dress, no matter how brightly she glowed? Who could refuse 7? The first house they went to was the palace of a king, such as palaces were in those days, which is to say the large mud hut on a hill above smaller mud huts. The king sent his men to see the commotion at his door, and they found the bone-ragged Manikarnika there, jade and granite and opal with their many-colored speckled skin, garnet red as blushing, shale and iron ore, gleaming silver and bright as water, and little diamond, pale and small and delicate as the slenderest strand of a spider's web. They clung together pitifully and asked to be brought inside the mud-brick walls, to be fed and clothed, to be loved. The king's men shuddered at their strange light and bolted their wooden gates against them. Undeterred, they went next to the cluster of small mud huts and knocked at the door of a poor widow's house. Surely, her husband dead and her children grown, she would take them in and call them daughters. The old widow opened her hide-bound door and saw there the Manikarnika, jade and granite and opal with their smooth, polished arms, garnet sharp-elbowed, shale and iron ore darkly glinting, and little diamond clear as morning. They huddled together mournfully, asking to be let in and out of the cold, given soup, given warm arms and soft words. The widow shuddered at their strange light and began to weep for all her lost ones, and in her weeping let the hide-bound door fall shut against them. But they did not give up. They went out beyond the mud huts to the mud-haired people who moved from place to place across the open steppes with wagons and horses and sleds. They went to one of the tents, unremarkable as any of the others, and called out to the young girl who lived there with her new infant. The girl opened the flap of her tent and saw there the Manikarnika, jade and granite and opal, cool as wind-smooth snow, garnet hot as sun-buttered sand, shale and iron ore freezing till their toes were black, and little diamond light and sweet as rain. They leaned one against the other, exhausted, and asked to be let in from the wild, covered in fur and given milk. The girl laughed and said she had plenty to spare. The sisters smiled like 7 dawns breaking, and triumphant they lay down, curled together with the nomad girl on the floor of a plain tent. And they were happy, and the ground beneath them was only a little darkened with the weight of their light. By morning, they were dead. The witch's tale continued. In the dungeon, dust and straw covered the dank floor, and no slanting silver of light crept in. There was no sound but the soft dripping of water from damp ceiling to damp floor. Scraps of unfamiliar meat and swamp-brown water had been pushed under the door. I had heard nothing but my grandmother's voice. She put a withered hand on my head, stroking the thick hair with a gentleness practiced on dozens of children. I looked up at her cracked lips, her cracked face. In the deep shadow, I curled into my grandmother's lap, trying to spread my meager, ragged dress over her painfully thin legs. She smiled down at me and shrugged off the cloth, as though it meant nothing to her, as though her lips were split and spotted with dried blood. And though her lips were split and spotted with dried blood, her face was lit like a festival lantern. I wished that I could be as brave as she was, that whatever strength she had earned in the cave had been mine too. I handed her the beaten jug of dirty water from near the door, trying to be happy in serving her as I used to be. But she refused it, and with hands broken and bloodied by whoever had dragged her here, she worked at the leather knots of her robe until she could peel the filthy cloth away from her shoulder. Flesh there was mangled and pitted, a long twisting scar that punctured and poisoned her brown skin. I stared. "So that you know what I tell you is true," she chuckled as she bound up her dress again. "I didn't doubt." My grandmother touched my cheek lightly. No, of course you didn't. You were always a good girl. And so you see, I have broken my promise. I disobey the fox. I tell you all these things I was meant to keep secret as a green-eyed baby in a brown-eyed man's house. But I've never much cared what the old red beast thought, and do you know, now the mare comes to me in my dreams, and I do ride her. I ride her over the blanched steppes, and the sun is gold and hot on our backs." She didn't need to say it. I felt it deep in my stomach that the mare would never come for me. I would never feel that hide between my calves. Grandmother Bentbow coughed like an arrow striking a tree. "Forgive me, little knife, that I haven't spent this time rocking you in my arms and singing you the songs of our mothers. It's too important that you learn what I suffered in the cave. We both know that you will never face those tests. There is now no one to guide you to the cave mouth, no one to kiss you and call you their best and prettiest goat. There will never be anyone to take you home when it is over, shaking and shivering in rough blankets, no one for you, and no one for the child you are carrying, as tiny within you as a mayfly on the slow river. So instead of a sweet reunion with your old grandmother, you get a lesson, and you'd better learn it and learn it well." My breath caught, knotted like new yarn in my dry throat. I had not even known that my belly had taken a child from the body of my husband before he died. But in that moment, I knew she told the truth. I fought to keep still at her side. Shakily, I whispered, "I am listening, grandmother. I am trying to walk with you and learn your steps." Her wrinkled eyelids slid closed as she spoke, and they quivered, as though tiny wolves were leaping beneath the skin. The wolf's tale continued. The young girl woke her camp screaming. Men came running. They opened her tent to find her huddled against her baby, sobbing, covered in light. Light dripped from her hair, down the bridge of her nose, from the lobes of her ears. It trickled into her mouth, splashed her child's forehead, pooled sickly between her breasts. Pale and bright as the whites of a maiden's eyes, it drenched the front of her hide dress. It spattered the walls and soaked the earthen floor of the tent into glowing, churning mud. Around her lay 7 stone bodies, and they did not glow or glimmer or gleam. Jade and granite and opal, dark and hollow as old trees, garnet leached and empty, shale and iron ore pale as paper, and diamond, little diamond, nothing left of her but a cicada shell, crystalline, clear, and nothing within her, not even dead bone. They had come, the girl wept in the night. The king's men who had known what had come begging at their door, known and called it strange and wicked. They had held her arms behind her while they cut open the pitiful sisters, who did not cry out when the light was let out of them. And it sprayed from them like blood, she cried. And she tasted it as it spurted warm over her face, and it tasted of sweet water and clover. They opened the throats of the stars, and when they left, she tried to hold her hands against the wounds, but there were too many, and she was not strong enough. And who among them knew how to heal a thing that is drowning in its own light, which is blood, which is light? The tribe was afraid and uncertain of what to do, but they washed the light from the poor girl and took the 7 stone bodies out into a great field waving with poppies and gave them what funeral rites they knew. And so it was that the stars learned that we could die, the biggest thing we could do. And those who were left vanished from the world into the crevices and secret places of the earth, terrified as rabbits. It was not long after that the girl and her black-eyed baby looked into the sky through gaps in the still wet ceiling of her tent and saw new stars there, 7 of them, clinging together like sisters. Grandmother's tale continued. Leolfa, the wolf star, had not moved one of her golden muscles while she spoke. Her voice had not lifted up nor dipped down. She just stared straight ahead. We do not know where they go, the ones that die. Where we go, Their bodies stay here and new stars peek out of the sky, but where are they? What should I have said to comfort her? That girl, that poor nomad girl, had nearly been drowned in light, the light of 7 bodies. She had choked on it, and her baby had sputtered in it. No other thing had ever known so much. Her children and her children's children were nearly mad with it. And as time went on, they began to seek us out, though each child had less and less of the Manikarnika's sheen on them. They came and they came, predictable as tides, and now you come, granddaughter dangling at the end of so many granddaughters, one after the other like a chain of folk passing a bucket of water between them. A little more spills out every time it changes hands. She shook her great shaggy head. We don't mind anymore. It's almost like having our cousins back. The polished quartz wall in which I had first seen my wolf self slowly melted into nothing, revealing a long tunnel into the black earth. She sighed with exhausted resignation and nudged me gently with her snout like a mother showing her pup the way to fresh water. The mingled light of our fur disappeared into the wall. The elfer trotted silently ahead of me, her paws steady and sure. She flickered like a brass lamp. The tunnel was longer than the other, so black that I had to stifle a yelp of despair when first I saw it. We crept on our bellies through the rock like a piece of bread stuck in a long throat, 4 paws scrabbling on the soil, hind legs crouched and aching. The throat opened into a room whose corners and rafters were washed with light, scoured with it brighter than day, a lather of light like soap rubbed furiously in the hand. I could hardly see, the change was so sudden, and in the center of it, the wolf creature like a sun gently blazing. The cavern was not empty. 7 biers were laid out in curving rows, each bearing a woman asleep or dead. 14 slender hands closed over 14 frozen breasts. Their hair swept over their pedestals as though it had grown 1,000 years. Their limbs were covered in jewels, more than I had ever seen together, piled up like apples at harvest. Piles of jade and granite and opal, of garnet bright as blood, of shale and ore, and of diamond, tiny diamonds glittering like snow. In the garden. Wakened now, the boy chewed slowly on an apple core, mesmerized. Wolves bounded gracefully through his mind, nosing the wind. He stretched his long arms, yawned, and pulled from his pack a rich red blanket edged in gold thread and embroidered with lilies. He wrapped it around his shoulders and edged gingerly toward the girl as a man would move towards a skittish colt. They huddled together under their scarlet tent, and she lowered her lashes earthward when his hand brushed her knee, snatching the water flask and drawing it in. They were very close. He could smell the musk of her hair, cedar and jasmine. The first lights of dawn, luminous and blue, filtered down through the fine fabric of leaves, writing in rose and silver shadows on their skin. It was very still, the world at dawn, under its glittering net of dew. In their little thicket, a pair of children who were very nearly finished with childhood sat dry and warm, and the girl's voice had fallen as silent as a cat's paw on pine needles. The infant sun brushed the boy's hair from his face with a shimmering cherubic hand. He did not move from the girl's side, but it was nearing light, and his sister would be rising soon, her face growing stormy at the sight of his empty bed. I have to go, he rasped finally. I have to get back before the household wakes up. The girl nodded, suddenly shy, drawing back into herself after all this long night of spinning out her heart like flax, straw into gold. But I'll come back, he reassured her, as the flocks of river birds do at sunset. I will bring us another supper, and you will tell me all the rest about the grandmother in the cave. He touched her face, and his hand on her cheek was as soft as a hare's paw. The girl smiled into his palm and nodded. Her luminous eyes lifted and long lashes closed briefly, exposing the swirling black of the birthmark covering her eyelids, inky and deep, a night without stars. The boy marked that he did not find it unbeautiful now that he knew her a little. He dipped his tousled golden head a little to meet her eyes as they slid open again. "I will come every night to hear your stories. Every night," he declared quietly, and ran into the striations of mist covering the gardens, catching in jasmine and aster and the apple trees. The girl bent to the remains of their evening meal and gathered together the flasks and crusts of bread to feed the crows and the gulls. She rose from her little bower, shaking a few errant petals from her hair in a shower lit by the strong red gold beams of the day. When the sun had lain down in the west and covered itself with long blue blankets, and the girl sat cross-legged under the silver lavender jasmine branches, she saw the boy's eager shadow racing across the thick emerald lawn to her. He burst into her thicket, industriously setting out her dinner. She had been sure he would not come. He brought dark bread and pale cheese, a slice of roasted lamb and a cluster of berries bulging with juice, several small roasted potatoes, a cold green apple, and a slice of chocolate, precious as myrrh. "I thought I would leave the wine tonight, so that I do not steal off to sleep again," he admitted bashfully, extending his water flask instead. No, it's all right. What you brought me is more than enough," she assured him with a nervous laugh. They fussed with the food and did not speak, the boy as eager for her tale as a bear seeking salmon in the frothing river. As she ate, her face grew brighter, as though she were a small sun herself, rising just as the great golden one went down. "How'd you live all these years in the garden?" The boy munched on a fat chunk of apple. The girl looked around. "The Sultan has more than enough fruit trees to feed one child, and the water in the fountains is clear and clean. I have had enough. The palace throws away more than I could ever use. Once in a while there is even an Amira's old dress tossed on the refuse pile, and when the winters have been harsh, the birds have brought me mice and rabbits. I'm cared for. The garden raised me. It is my mother and my father. And mothers and fathers always find a way to feed and clothe their children." "The birds?" The boy was incredulous. She shrugged. "All creatures are lonely. They are drawn to me and I am drawn to them, and we warm each other in the snow. You should know better. Weren't you drawn too? And I feed you my stories like morsels of meat roasted in a fire." The boy blushed deeply, turning his eyes away from her. They finished their meal in silence. Finally, when lamb and fruit had been eaten, sweet water had been drunk, and each of them had found a comfortable place in the flower thicket to lean on their sides, heads bent inward like conspirators, the girl spoke, and her voice filled up the boy like cream splashing in a silver bowl. And that's where we'll leave off for tonight, and pick up with grandmother again tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. Oh my God, there's some Steven Universe action in that. I didn't remember that. Of course, 18 years ago, I can safely say that my garnet came first, but it's certainly my garnet and my diamond. But yeah, I did not remember that I had all those same names and all of that. But I do like my set names, so I'm not really surprised. I'll take any questions if anyone has any questions they want to ask, but you'll have to be quick with the tippity typing. I've been looking for the bread, wheat, and dreams for a while. You said in a previous night you still have some you take at conventions till the world reopens. Is there another way to get one? There isn't, as far as I know. I mean, you can pay several $100s to somebody on Amazon, but other than that, I don't know. You could maybe ask Subterranean Press. They might have a few extras somewhere, but I'm pretty sure they don't. And I'm not going to the post office just at the moment. Otherwise, I would offer to sell you one, but I just can't justify the non-essential trip right now. But when the world opens again, contact me on Twitter and we'll see what we can do for you. Major SU flashbacks. I swear to God, I wrote it in 2002. But it's certainly it's certainly funny to see that. I mean, the Manikarnika are not unlike the Crystal Gems, I suppose. They don't have a very good sense of humor, though. if I could meet any character from one of the girls' stories, who would it be? Oh God, the fact is I don't really remember very many of the girls' stories, as I've been talking about. It's been so long since I wrote them that really I only remember a handful. Maybe Taglio or the Manticore. Yeah, I mean, ask me that question when we're closer to the middle and I can remember more of it. But Taglio is definitely a favorite. Yeah, it's such a strange thing, like to be able to forget something that was just everything in my mind for quite some time. It took a couple of years to write this. And now it was so long ago that I remember the girl and I remember the boy and I remember characters here and there, but like the big overarch of it's been replaced by the plots of other books and the book I'm writing right now and all of that. I wrote it down so I wouldn't have to remember it. I'd go with Lantern. Yeah. And the funny thing is, like, you say a name Lantern, I'm like, oh, Lantern, of course. And Heath made a joke about a bartender that I had forgotten was a bear the other night. And I just, like, this is literally, if any of my books are cast of thousands, this is literally the book that has a cast of thousands. There are so many characters. I'm honestly surprised that I ever wrote any more books after that. You would think that I would just have blown it with this one book, given how many there are. I'm so glad that you and your son are watching Reeds and Strings. That's lovely. I hope that this will be a comforting ritual for some of you, as it is for the characters in the book. It's certainly become a comforting ritual for me as we stare into the lost April and all of the sort of frightening things that come with it. This is the last day of my 14-day quarantine after coming back from overseas. So this is like the only day on which I can be certain that I'm not sick before nobody knows anymore. But the world doesn't go on. The world goes on, but we've stopped it. It's so very strange. I didn't even know you could. Somebody asked what part of the world's mythology was this story drawn from. Quite a variety. Throughout the Orphan's tales, there is a huge representation of cultures across the world. This one, grandmother bent bow and knife, and their whole tribe is meant to be sort of Scythian in origin, but the stuff with the stars is mostly me. There's hints of other cultures here and there, but there's tribal nomadic culture is meant to be Scythian, and then I've mapped a bunch of star mythology on top of it. But you'll definitely be able to tell when we start jumping out of their little story cluster into other ones. Which books of mine have references of these two books on them? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I mean, there's themes that go through all of my books, so I'm sure that there's little references to Orphan's Tales and other things. I don't do the Stephen King thing of like trying to make them all in the same universe. The Orphan's Tales is very complete within itself, but yeah, I'm not sure what that question means. Yeah, so like I said, you'll be able to tell when we jump out of Knife and her whole little family grief fest, and when we start getting into sort of other cultural reference, they're definitely all over the place in Orphan's Tales. Hi, Vixie. Yeah, anybody else have a question while I moisten my throat from all that? You can tell my throat's starting to get rattled reading every day. It would be very strange to think of The Girl in the Garden and Decibel in the same world. Definitely, they are not meant to occupy the same universe, and like it's not even necessarily meant. It's not meant to be our world. This is I would call this a secondary world fantasy, but it certainly is inspired by mythology from all around the world. It's very important to me not to just stick to regurgitating Western myth, but when trying to paint a whole world, to have a vast variety of cultures. The apocalypse is that my chickens have laid like over 30 eggs in the last 3 days, and now we are drowning in eggs. And people keep saying to give it to our neighbors, but like we aren't supposed to have contact with our neighbors, and I'm not sure even how to contact them other than knocking on our doors. But we are floating in eggs right now. Thank you. My eyeliner is reluctantly applied. I don't think I thought about having to put makeup on every day when I committed to doing this thing, or even like that some of my makeup would run out on day 5. Lumen is mad that she can't eat the screen while I am doing these things. That would be her preference. But she's fine. She also would like to be out a lot more. She gets a walk, but she doesn't get to go to the dog park or anything, so life is useless as far as she's concerned. But yeah. Many eggs. Everyone has the eggs. When life gives you eggs, you make eggnog. Ugh, I hate eggnog. Flan. I've never made flan. I'm not a big fan of the texture, but maybe one of these days. So I will tell you that right after this, I'm going to fire up YouTube Live and re-record the first night because the Instagram gods ate it. And if I'm trying to keep an archive, it has to be complete. And I really don't want to read it again. So I have to do it now, or I will just find an excuse to not do it in the future. So if you care to watch the first night again, I'm going to be over at my channel on YouTube. It'll be a live stream because otherwise I'll go back and re-record things if I make a mistake, and I don't want to do that. So it's Cat Valenti Live is my channel over there. And you can watch it if you want to. Or not. I'm completely fine being alone. Once again, for legality's sake, this has not been an audiobook. This has been a play. And would I be able to have a movie made of one of my books, and which one? Well, supposedly the space opera movie is still moving forward. I would love a Fairyland movie. That would probably be my preference if I were to pick one, but I'm super excited about the space opera movie. That would be tied for it. Yeah, so hopefully that actually happens. Nobody can tell anything with Hollywood, and certainly at the moment nothing is shooting anywhere. So yeah, so the legalities are, this is not an audiobook, this has been a play. You can subscribe to my Patreon at Cat Valenti. You can find me on Twitter at Cat Valenti as well. I'm usually Cat Valenti in various places. There is a tip jar in my Instagram profile and on my website. These are absolutely free readings, but times are pretty tight for us. So if you feel like dropping a coin in the hat, please do so. I will thank you by name in the next stream, which feels a little and weird, but it's the apocalypse, so weirdness is de rigueur. Deeply appreciative of anybody who does. And other than that, I will see all of you tomorrow night. I too would love a Radiance movie. That would be cool. I will see you tomorrow in the garden for more not Steven Universe Garnet and Jade and Diamond, but pre-Steven Universe Garnet and Diamond. Toss a coin to your word witch. Love it. Love it. Yeah. Have a lovely night, you guys. If you are with people in your home and quarantine with them, give them a hug. Please stay safe. Please stay well. Please stay home. And I will be here for you to keep you well fed with stories every night at 8:30 Eastern Time. Same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel. Good night.